It is time to touch the electric fence and talk about recent events in Sino-Indian relations. In June 2020, a fight broke out between Chinese and Indian border guards in the border area of the Galwan Valley. Depending on which sources you read, some 20 Indian soldiers died, some 43 to 60 or so Chinese casualties, meaning injury or deaths, occurred. What happened in the Galwan? Why is it such a big deal? In this video, I talk a bit about it. But first, I'm going to start off with a public service announcement. I'm going to try to be as objective and accurate as possible, but of course I know I'm going to make mistakes, and those mistakes are going to piss some people off. For that, I apologize in advance, but please be nice in the comments, or else I will ban you. India and China have been at odds with each other over this mountainous land for decades. It's a legacy of the unresolved borders along their predecessor states of the 20th century. They fought a brief 1962 war, which ended in a difficult defeat for India. Since then, there have been substantial military shows of power and standoffs, and 3 decades of talks, with more than 20 since the 1980s alone, have not been able to make meaningful ground. Beyond its ideological stance on never giving up territory, China sees the area as strategically important. The Tibet region, for example, provides a substantial part of China's water supply. India has its own strong nationalist and ideological beliefs as well, as strong as those in China. In addition, India still smarts from its loss in the 1962 Sino-Indian War and claims that China occupies some 38,000 kilometers of their land. Add in the fact that China and Pakistan are close military allies, and you can see why India should be paying very close attention to this. The Galwan Valley sits in the area of Buddhist majority Ladakh, which in turn is part of the strategically important area of Kashmir. For decades, it has been peaceful, but its location on what is called the line of actual control makes it a hotspot. What is the line of actual control? It's the status quo. Back in 1959, before the 1962 war, Chinese Premier Zhou Enlai proposed a boundary settlement to Indian PM Nehru. Zhou's proposal would have China recognize what is called the McMahon Line, a demarcation line between Tibet and then British-administered India proposed by British colonial administrator Sir Henry McMahon in 1914 on the eastern sector if India recognized the current status quo on the western sector in eastern Ladakh. Nehru rejected this proposal, but when the Chinese unilaterally declared a ceasefire at the end of the 1962 Sino-Indian War, they withdrew their troops behind the borders from that 1959 proposal. Over the years, the line of actual control have moved and flowed depending on border clashes and fights. In 2019, India ended the limited autonomy of its two special provinces, Jammu and Kashmir. The government moved to directly govern the area. Ladakh had previously been a part of Kashmir. An act passed by the Parliament of India elevated territory alongside Jammu and Kashmir. This move alarmed the Chinese. As long as the states had been nominally autonomous, they had their own elected officials, flag, etc., and could be seen as somewhat buffer states for Indian ambitions. Now those were removed. Thus, this generally theorized to be the starting point of renewed tensions. Over the years, China and India have had very different ideas over what the LAC actually was, and has led to a distinct military imbalance in the region. China sees the LAC as a military border, and over the years have done substantial work to upgrade its border management. This includes large military complexes and roads that can help quickly bring military troops to any hotspot. Much of this has been done over the diplomatic protests of various governments, including those of India and Bhutan. There are now at least 2 group armies, 3 Air Force bases, and 1 rocket force group at the LAC. Some 200,000 soldiers are located in the Tibet Autonomous Region, and they are quite trained for mountain warfare. And then there's the close military partnerships with Pakistan, which I will very briefly touch on. The PLA and the Pakistan Army have trained together, and a two-front war against India is more than possible. And Pakistan, for its part, has been making trouble for India on its western border. Chinese border incursions have been happening for years. It's the classic Chinese technique of salami slicing. They love to do this. They encroach little by little over time, de facto taking territory, without triggering escalation. India, for its part, did not invest anywhere near as much effort or resources into their border management, to be honest. The reasons for this are societal, financial, and political. For generations of politicians, incursions by the Chinese military were a political situation that needed to be managed. So they came up with stories and claims for the general public to consume with the hopeful goal of stemming any tide of nationalism that might affect their political situation. But after a large standoff in 2017 that lasted for 2 months, it became clear to the Indians that additional work needed to be done to address this imbalance. It was their attempt to partially close the military gap that China claims sparked the 2020 June fight. With such high tensions, only the littlest thing needed to happen before things blew up. India began to build a feeder road into the Galwan Valley. China freaked because the Galwan Valley is so critical to them. The Galwan Valley is an important part of the Chinese military strategy to watch and prevent Indian troops from coming up another road called the DBO. And I'm going to get this name wrong. Durbuk Shayok Dalat Bek Oldi Road. The DBO road forms a critical part of the Indian ability to bring reinforcements to the LAC. Chinese incursions had pushed the LAC to hug along a high-altitude area called Sub-Sector North. It's a tactical advantage for the Chinese because the Chinese have great roads leading up to the Sub-Sector North area, but the Indians don't. The DBO would let the Indians better navigate this area, crossing the Sasser Ridge to reach the SSN. The area can get bombarded by bad weather. During such times, it could take some 18 to 25 days to navigate. Even during the best of times, it could take up to 6. The DBO would cut that by at least half. From a Chinese military perspective, the existence of this new feeder road helps the Indian Army invalidate a previous Chinese tactical strength. In the event of a conflict, the PLA would have been able to take steps to prevent Indian troops from ever getting to their own border. The June 2020 fight followed several others taking place in May 2020 in other parts of the LAC, but this June one was the biggest. It lasted for 6 hours in the Galwan Valley. It reportedly started when an Indian patrol came across Chinese tents in an observation post erected in contravention of a previously held agreement. The Indian patrol destroyed the observation post, which provoked an attack, and this is according to Indian perspectives. Per long-standing traditions, patrols hold firearms but refrain to use them so to prevent escalation. Instead, they use clubs, rocks, and iron rods. Some 600 men fought in the pitch-black night. Some died when they slipped or fell or were pushed into the fast-moving Galwan River. The Galwan Valley conflict has had massive repercussions for Sino-Indian relations. India cut off access to many Chinese apps like TikTok and WeChat. The country has also implemented sanctions and boycotts, causing Chinese imports to drop by a reported 25% year over year. And has tipped the Indians off to their defects in the area and spurred them to improve their border infrastructure. Some 12,000 additional workers have been reassigned to work on building out border roads across the Sino-Indian border with special focus on Ladakh and the LAC. But there remains a substantial gap in organization and power between the two sides right now. Not all of these are measured in guns and tanks. For example, the entire Chinese border strategy is aligned under a single authority, a general from the Tibet Autonomous Region, while the Indian side falls under many overlapping authorities. This is just one example. Without additional reforms and a focused strategy, the next hot Sino-Indian war shows a distinct advantage for the Chinese. All right, everyone, have a good one. Stay safe.